Well, I'm the only person between you and all of the questions you've stockpiled and then the drinks after that, so I'll try to be fairly fast. You'll also see that the graphics on these slides are very modest, and that will help us to move fast along the way. Most of you are pretty familiar with the work that Internet 2 and InCommon has done in federated identity. We began this task in 1999 as the hardest problem we could think of. Now, 14 years later, it's the hardest problem we can think of. But we've made good progress in that process. Much of what we'll be describing here is an attempt to take the hard-won lessons learned in InCommon and transfer them to the broader citizen-centric world that we want to all live in. We started work on SAML in 2000. 4 of the 7 SAML authors were Shibboleth and InCommon participants. We've been at this for a while. I appreciate the comments about the maturity of our trust framework. We see it as really needing a whole lot more work, so stay with us for a while, folks, because there's new frontiers. It's a fairly distinctive community for a couple of reasons. We have some very bright people. Better than that, we have some really difficult problems. And so what makes higher ed important is that we are worst-case engineering. If it will work in higher ed, it will probably work in almost every other environment. We're also fairly important in that we treasure privacy. It's been a tradition of academia from I believe, Alexandria and the Alexandria Library. We also are working with the next generation of consumers. But we recognize that as we try to generalize our approaches, we also wear sandals, and that may make some of our approaches less appropriate in the larger world. And a fair bit of the work that we're doing right now is trying to make those adaptations, though we still wear sandals. With that, let me describe the piece parts that we're trying to assemble together into whole cloth. We want to create the key components for authentication and an attribute ecosystem. So we are thrilled that this community has moved forward from thinking about the identity ecosystem to thinking about the attribute ecosystem. It's in the attribute ecosystem that we find both scale for access control and privacy. And so it's been a wonderful movement, even in the year and a half of this program, to get us to that point where we're rolling the words attribute out left and right as we've cleared the underbrush of identity. So we begin with some multi-factor authentication because good privacy begins with good security. We are moving into citizen-centric attribute work. We'll describe how the use cases that you've been developing earlier today will be annotated with attributes as possible suggestions of how to make this stuff interoperable and scalable. We're building a privacy manager for attribute release, authorization settings, et cetera. We're working with the Center for Usable Privacy and Security at Carnegie Mellon. They're the best in the biz. It's very interesting to hear at least 2 other privacy managers floating around here, the work that Dave Cox was mentioning and one of the other pilots. I hope that we're in the space of wide experimentation around privacy management, followed by the fact that I can rent almost any kind of car and still drive it. We need to get to that same level of customization and distinguishing and interoperability in privacy management. We're going to be trying to integrate anonymous credentials at scale. I'll come back to that in a second. And then all of this really requires metadata to work. Again, one of the ways this community has moved forward is to move from bilateral federation, which was initially what going to the cloud meant, to multilateral federation, many partners, many relying parties, many identity providers. We're in the right problem space. The partners include Internet 2 and InCommon. We have developers, as I said, at Carnegie Mellon. We have the original developer of IDEMIX anonymous credentials as part of our team at Brown. And then we have folks from Wisconsin driving our citizen-centric work. We have 3 primary institutions for the MFA deployments. And here we're trying intensively to just move the needle of security in higher education. We're gathering lots of returns on investment, lots of strategies on deployment. I'll talk about that briefly in a second. We have over 1 million students spread out over 30 institutions in the MFA cohortium. Don't look that up in the dictionary, we made it up, to work on this process. And then we're assembling a set of lead dogs to help guide the development of the privacy manager, et cetera. And R&E federations from the very beginning have been international in our problem set. We're trying to be international in our solutions. As we consider things like citizen-centric attributes, we're looking at what other countries are doing. As we consider privacy management, we're very respectful of the EU laws on this in this space and are trying to accommodate all of those measures. So the MFA work has begun last month. We expect to have widespread deployment of a variety of form factors along the way. Duo is going to be the principal use of this. We are also producing a number of open source pieces of software that some of you may find valuable. For those of you who use Shibboleth, you'll notice that the login handler doesn't do multi-factor authentication. In 2 to 3 months, it will. Open source, available for use. Similarly, with another widespread single sign-on solution, CAS in our life. We also have developed some open source software around certificate lifecycle management. I'm one of those people who believes that next year is going to be the year of PKI, and I've been believing that since 1998. But that said, I think we're getting very close, and I think the biggest impediment that we've had to deal with so far is the life cycle management of certificates and the use of certificates by applications. And this tool does both, and I'll talk about it in a bit. Here's the background on the MFA cohortium. There are websites out there. In the interest of time and accommodating the sets of questions, I'll hop over this one and come to the citizen-centric attribute tools, et cetera. So we already have our first deliverable up in terms of a schema catalog and attribute registry. It's available on our website. It has several hundred attributes garnered from 10 to 15 different widely used schema, varying from NIEM on one side with its hundreds of attributes to EduPerson on the other side, which is the anchor for in common, which has 6 attributes. So somewhere between 6 and 300 may be a magical number. We've gathered all those together. We're starting a set of analyses around duplication of those attributes, distinctions among those attributes. The next thing that we'll be doing relative to the privacy manager is how does the naming of the attributes affect the release decisions that individuals make about releasing those attributes. This is a space where we've done no research as a community. I am shocked that we consider ourselves to be the data points that we build our technologies on, and there's not a single data point in this room. We're all trained professionals in this area. We are also having a particular focus on accessibility. If you don't know about GPII.net, you want to. It is 9 pages of schema that address compensatory requirements for a variety of different disabilities. It includes not only physical disabilities, color blindness, screen readers, et cetera. It also includes age-related disabilities, one that I can increasingly respond to, so my key clicks aren't as fast as they used to be. And then most importantly, it responds to cognitive disabilities. And when you move from physical disabilities where you may make compensatory settings within your browser, but now you have multiple devices and multiple browsers to have to make compensatory settings, to cognitive disabilities, I can't compensate for the inability to do a depth-first search by setting something up in my browser. I've got to go back to the content providers and ask them to refactor their content in ways that are commensurate with my requirements. That is not a difficult activity, but it's one that we have to illustrate to the content providers to begin that refactoring. You might ask, well, 9 pages of schema. Who's going to configure all of that stuff? The good people at GPII are doing a very holistic approach. They are now developing tools that will allow medical practitioners to create not only a prescription, but a schema setting for you of the requirements that will help compensatory access for you. Take that, stick it in the cloud, stick it on a token, we don't care where, have it drive the presentation of content to you. By the way, that's one of the 3 ISO standards that is freely available. So even ISO recognizes that some things are close to the heart. We'll be doing demos of this. I would hope that by one of the fall plenaries, we will have an actual demo of GPII affecting the presentation of content to someone who has compensatory requirements. We are working, as I said, with Carnegie Mellon University and the Center for Usable Privacy and Security on a privacy manager. We've created a research protocol that is investigating what is it that people really understand about attribute release, which is wretchedly little. We're starting to look at the inconsistencies between principles and behavior. One of the places that will lead us to, in year 2, is the development of nudging technologies for privacy. And you have seen nudging in password meters that let you know something about the strength of your password as you're typing it. Can we adapt that kind of approach to nudge people to better privacy behavior? So we're not just accepting people as they are, we're giving them the opportunity to learn from the experiences that, unfortunately, the consumer marketplace is giving us in this space and helpfully educate them about their privacy uses. We already have a number of results that are fairly interesting. They're up on our website. That'll be posted at the end. One of the most interesting results just came out in the last few days, which is the degree of concern that people have about the release of attributes. And we thought that people would be fairly comfortable with default settings. People want notifications every time something is triggered. We didn't expect that. They don't want to necessarily be stopped. The notification may be out of band, but people are wanting that as the statistics on that were over 85% of the sampled population wanted some kind of notification. Again, we are at the beginning of this research cycle, and one of our other agenda items here is to breed an academic research community that will give us hard data about what people really are interested in this space. We also will be using this privacy manager to span a variety of credentials. So we live typically in the federated space. We've had conversations with the OpenID Connect people about making this work for that platform. And lastly, we want to have the privacy manager span anonymous credentials, and I'll be describing those in a second. Anonymous credentials have been typically described as way cool technology in search of a problem. And they've been around for 10 years now. They go back to Stefan Brand's original PhD thesis, and then that evolved into work by both IBM in IDEMIX and by Microsoft in UProve. It's a challenging set of technologies. Because it was invented over 10 years ago, it doesn't work well in the modern world. It doesn't have mobility for the tokens. The tokens originally were downloaded into your web browser. Which platform would you like your token on now? It doesn't work well in the modern world. There's no knowledge of informed consent. And one of the key aspects of our privacy manager is informed consent. And I want to echo the statements that Jeremy made at the beginning. We want engagement with the IDESG on all of these topics. So I've had some very positive interactions with the Proactive Privacy Subcommittee of the Privacy Committee about how do you operationalize informed consent. We have a list of issues that we're bringing to that group. If you're interested in participating and helping us chart the course, please join the Proactive Privacy Subcommittee and guide this effort forward. We are very open to inclusion. One of the, so we'll be working with the anonymous credentials in a variety of use cases, and I won't go into the technology involved in it in the interest of getting to the questions, but most of this stuff will need metadata for helping informed users or users be informed in their consent decisions. So I'm very pleased as well to see the trust marks that were described earlier. We have certification marks in our federation which have proven to be very successful in informing identity providers and users about what attributes should be released, what the characteristics of the applications are. So again, I think as a community we've already moved a significant path, a significant way down the path with our understanding of what are the components for the system. Here's a number of our use cases. You'll see some that were echoed earlier. COPPA compliance is certainly a part of that. Over legal age for whatever purpose you want to be over legal age. Think about an e-diploma. So when you get your regular diploma from MIT, you'll also get an anonymous credential e-diploma, and that way it can be validated that you graduated MIT without MIT knowing who's asking about that. Of the characteristics of the identity ecosystem that NSTIC laid out initially, the most challenging in our mind has been the unobservability characteristic. Classic federated identity can deliver unlinkability and anonymity and untraceability. It fails structurally, architecturally at unobservability. We think the integration of anonymous credentials will make for a deeply strengthened identity ecosystem. Again, these use cases will be out there. People have mentioned all of these powerful cases for... oh, that got... okay. Deliverables and the functional components. Hold on. Thank you. One last thing that I'd like to lay out is early on in this work we engaged with Kantara and the Attributes in Motion Working Group to develop a set of graphics that would help illustrate not only the flows of attributes, but the flow of trust and consent, because frankly the flow of attributes is pretty boring. So here's the typical flow of attributes, again, primitive graphics, I apologize, where the identity provider is also the attribute provider, and they release attributes. The user controls the release of attributes to an application provider. I want to add informed consent. Whoa, what just changed? Everything changed. So the flow of trust, the flow of privacy, the flow of consent is far more interesting than the flow of attributes. And you can see that we've put in a variety of pieces of infrastructure to make the scale. Application assessors that assess that the application is doing what it says it does, that it properly disposes of the attributes, that it's asking for the minimum set of attributes necessary for it to operate on, etc. The Federation is carrying this metadata. That allows it to be accessed so that when I hit the Tell Me More button on my privacy manager before I release information, the Tell Me More button can extract information from the metadata. The Tell Me More button in the fall will be able to go to reputation systems that you set up, so your friends can help recommend what the right privacy mechanisms are for this piece. So that Tell Me More button is the essence of our informed consent. We batted it back and forth with the Proactive Privacy Subcommittee, and we feel like we're on to something here. So with that as the flow, we have some accomplishments. Again, I want to get to the panel if we're going to get to it. We have some immediate goals. All these slides will be available on the website. We're into full motion JPEG now. So lessons learned. Again, this community has moved from being focused on the identities to being focused on the attributes, the trust in the attributes, the assurance, the control of those attributes. We have moved a considerable distance already. Wonderful. Thank you, folks. Getting people to understand the consequences of their privacy decisions is hard. So we got to get the defaults right, because 90% of the people just want to click through. But 10% of the people want to understand. It may be the aged, as Resilient was talking about, and maybe others. One of the other things we've turned out is that users are less concerned with how long you keep the data than the downstream use of the data. So the studies from Carnegie Mellon are very clear. I'm really concerned not about the release of the information, but what is that third party going to do in releasing it? when you say what is downstream to them, it gets very fuzzy. So one of the ways we're going to have to use educational techniques is to help illustrate with some good graphics, and you can see the beginnings of those in some of the other efforts in the identity ecosystem, to begin to capture downstream and redress. We just finished a survey to ask, your attributes being released by Facebook, do you know what they are? Do you know how to change that? I won't tell you what the numbers were, but they were depressing. Strong interest in multi-factor authentication with a desire to learn more. I believe that we're going to be producing a new generation of consumers who are utterly comfortable with multi-factor authentication. We better. Website and wiki, Jeremy.